Hello and a warm welcome to this episode of Business Africa. In today's program, Africa's GDP currently stands at 4%. The continent's economic growth is increasingly attracting investors. Certification of sustainable cocoa producers, and particularly those in Africa, worry over new certification standards which they vex leave them with an income below the poverty line. And bad news for the African economy, whose main trading partner China has recorded a sharp 6% decline in growth in the third quarter of the year. Africa is one of the continents that is attracting more and more investors, and the trend is only increasing. After raw materials, the rise of the middle class and the digital revolution are the driving forces behind this growth. Half of the countries that experienced significant growth in 2017 were African countries, proving that the continent is moving forward with more specific objectives. 5 sectors have been identified as the main drivers of growth in the coming years, as Ronald Kato and Cedric Seosolo tell us in the following report.
For investors interested in the African continent, specialists have identified 5 sectors that will drive growth in the coming years. Energy and agriculture are the most critical, according to the survey. Investors are upbeat about the energy sector. 73% of those surveyed believe it will help spur industrial growth, urbanization, and manufacturing. Agriculture, which was endorsed by 65% of those surveyed, is in second place. Financial services and commercial retailing, which have seen strong growth in recent years, are ranked 3rd and 4th respectively. They'll be driven by the growth of a middle class willing to consume more. 59% of stakeholders believe that the financial services sector represents the future of Africa. Overall growth is expected to continue to improve this year, according to estimates by the African Development Bank and the International Monetary Fund. The IMF estimates that African growth will average 4% between 2018 and 2020.
Let's discuss this with William Brents from the Media, Communications and Contents Department at Power of All. Hello, William, and welcome.
Thank you for having me.
How can sectors cited above help to increase yields on the African continent?
I think it's important to recognize and remember that Africa's food importation bill is continuing to go up. And we know that many of the food products that Africa imports can actually be competitively produced domestically. At the same time, just remember that poverty is mainly a rural issue in Africa. About 80% of Africa's poor are rural, and on average, 70% of their income comes from farming. So this is a really, really important, critical issue for increasing agricultural yields and improving the lives of farmers. And we're already seeing pretty rapid uptake of solar irrigation systems. Africa has almost 2/3 of the world's uncultivated arable land, so it's land that you can farm, but it has the lowest crop yields of any region. So less than 6% of farmland in sub-Saharan Africa is under irrigation, and the world average is about 20%. So there's a huge amount of potential there for solar irrigation. We also need to see bigger solar systems that can power agricultural processing, milling, grinding, fruit drying, as well as another really important application, which is cold storage. So creating the cold chain to preserve harvested food.
To what extent are these models viable and sustainable in terms of food security and economic development on the continent?
The Food and Agriculture Organization says that an increase of 80% in productivity can be achieved by providing electricity to rural communities. And rural communities are best served, no doubt about it, by distributed renewable energy systems, solar, mini grids, et cetera. So that's on the development side. In terms of food security, we're also starting to see increasing evidence that distributed energy infrastructure like mini grids is proving to be more resilient than traditional energy infrastructure. So that's important in sub-Saharan Africa, which is very vulnerable to climate change. I think the milk sector is a good example of what's possible. So, for example, in Kenya, a number of solar-powered milk centers have been deployed, and they've replaced diesel generators, which had traditionally been used, or they've entered a region which was completely off-grid. And that's had the result of increasing savings for local farmers by eliminating the spending on diesel. Diesel is very expensive relative to solar.
So what role should African states play in ensuring food security and economic development on the continent?
African leaders have a huge role to play. Government is critical in all of this. The African Development Bank has identified powering Africa and feeding Africa as two of its top priorities. That's not going to happen unless those two sectors work very closely together, and that requires political leadership. We need better regulation. We need blended finance, less red tape to get permits and agreements needed. And we need to do more to encourage the entrepreneurs who are going to go out and solve these issues. But movement's happening. It's very encouraging. We're seeing Nigeria take up the mantle on mini-grids in agriculture. The World Bank is increasing its activities on this issue. So more to be seen in the coming days. We only solve these major development issues in Africa and elsewhere in the world if there is more collaboration. And we continue to see what I call solution silos, where the agriculture sector is working in its silo, the energy sector is working in its silo, and only when those things start to come together and there's more collaboration are we going to be successful in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals.
Thank you, William, for your views on growth sectors in Africa and their development. William Brent, Head of Communications, Media and Contents for Power of All, was online from Barcelona, Spain.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Look forward to the next time.
We take a short break, and when we return, we look at the impact of cocoa certification on producers in Africa. I'll be right back.